In a world tormented by grotesque creatures enshrouded in darkness, there is one name even the deepest horrors of the night themselves dread. Not a monster, but a man. A beacon amidst fear. A tireless hunter. A true adversary of evil. Rudolph Van Richten. Once a respected physician, now the embodiment of nightmares for all supernatural beings, Van Richten's transformation is a tale spun from personal tragedy. His journey, not for the faint-hearted, is marked by profound loss, unwavering tenacity, and a backstory so tragic you'd think he was a D&D player himself. However, behind the hunter's resolute visage hides a complex network of buried secrets and inner torment. Each step on his path of retribution unearths haunting truths that have molded him, experiences that have driven him to the edge of despair. And today, in Forgotten Lore, we're going to delve into each edition that Van Richten appears in the Ravenloft setting to truly understand this iconic D&D monster hunter. Starting us off in first edition, there is a Ravenloft setting, and we do see Strahd von Zarovich, who is one of Van Richten's enemies that we see over time. Van Richten himself is not in Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. To see Van Richten, we have to travel to 2nd edition, where he might be mentioned more than any other character, considering he has about 9 books in his name. And throughout these books, we get a picture of his life told by himself, as he documents in charts all of the knowledge he collected over his life on all of the different monsters, ghouls, ghosts, zombies, vampires, and other creatures of the domains of dread. We begin our story in a small kingdom of Darkon, which is in the domains of dread in Ravenloft. Van Richten lives here a simple life. He's a scholar and a doctor who believed it was his destiny to heal, to treat sicknesses of the body with the herbal cures that he had found from his family. Van Richten describes his own life as placid and enjoyable. He was, after all, a simple man. He was married to his childhood sweetheart, named Ingrid, and when they had a son, he thought he was the happiest man alive. He named his son Erasmus, meaning beloved, and for 14 summers, Erasmus was his pride and joy. While he was treating someone in a nearby village, his son was set upon by Vistani, people who wander the lands and travel the strange mists of Barovia, where they stole him. Van Richten swore an oath to himself that he would never rest until Erasmus was freed from whatever unholy fate possessed him. So he set out immediately. The trail was cold, difficult, and it took a very long time before he finally tracked the Vistani, but by the time he got there, Erasmus was not with them. Van Richten simply says that he extracted the whereabouts of his son from the leader, who they sold into servitude to a local landowner, and so Van Richten traveled to this baron. Van Richten says he can still recall the first glimpse he had of Metis. A tall man, slender and graceful, a pale face full of fine features, and its eyes were as black as pools of ink. As he heard Van Richten's demand, his thin, expressive lips curled in a smile that could only be described as exceedingly cruel. He laughed coldly and turned his back, while Van Richten was escorted from the property by his minions. Van Richten had not given up quite yet as he camped outside of the walls of the surrounding Metis land, though darkness and despair enfolded him, as he had no idea what to do. But then, through a miracle as it seems, Erasmus exited himself and came to Van Richten. He had evaded the Baron's soldiers and climbed the wall, though something was not right. Van Richten states that he knew the truth even before Erasmus spoke the words. As soon as he saw the ivory pallor of his face under the moonlight, as soon as he glimpsed the same dark pits that were his eyes he had seen on Baron Metis, he knew his son was dead. Though he still walked, life and death, there would only be one truth. The Baron was a vampire, and he had passed on that dark gift to Van Richten's only son. So Van Richten wept in the night and cried the inconsolable tears of a terrified child, though the worst was yet to come. Erasmus had something to ask of his father, and since the dark gift had only recently been given, and Erasmus's thoughts still ran, as his mortal mind was dwindling, he could feel it slipping. And so, Van Richten's only son, Erasmus, sat by him and begged Van Richten to destroy him. Right then, that very night, Erasmus even brought a sharpened wooden stake and a mallet Van Richten says that he doubts anyone can ever truly understand the torment he suffered that night. His son was dead, he knew that. But here he was, standing, talking. How could he find the capacity to kill him? And how could he not? To doom his only son to an eternity of torment. And so, for several hours, as the moon sank towards the distant horizon, they talked, they relived their short, joyous times together, and they cried. As dawn was coming upon them, Erasmus Van Richten lay himself down in the meadow and handed the stake and mallet to his father. Van Richten thought that nothing, no feeling in the world could be worse, but he knew he had to carry on, and he writes that only the thought of his wife waiting anxiously for him at home prevented him from taking his own life. And so he began the long journey back home, but when he reached his home, Baron Mattis had somehow beat him back. A note from Mattis stating that matters were now in balance. Van Richten had taken something from Mattis, and so Mattis had taken something from Van Richten. And as Van Richten found the body of his wife Ingrid, his vision changed. His purpose in life was not to rid the body of disease or poison. It was to rid society of their disease and poison. And so he swore himself to a new career, the pursuit and destruction of those creatures such as the one that had taken his son and wife, that feed on the body of society as a cancer feeds on the body of a man. And he swore that his first victim would be Baron Mattis. We read this passage 30 years after its events, and since then Van Richten has been very busy, as he wrote 9 guides on different monsters across the land. Ghosts, vampires, werebeasts, witches, ancient dead, the created, the lich, demons, and the Vistani. Out of all of these, he harbors the most hate for vampires, and harbors an unfounded hate for the Vistani, who had originally kidnapped his son. Van Richten writes a lot of his age and his deterioration of health, and this is why he writes his guides. He knows he can do a lot of good in his life, hunting down every last vampire that he knows of, killing every last werebeast that he hears of, or destroying lich after lich. But what will really rid the world of these evils is knowledge. And arming all other adventurers, citizens, and peoples of Ravenloft is the only way to truly rid everyone of these evils. It is worth noting that a lot of Van Richten's early works, he does speak of vengeance, namely the vampires and the Vistani that originally started this goal of his. But he writes time and time again that he is not driven by vengeance. This was once true, he does admit, and he admits that he took great pleasure in sending the felled beast who destroyed his family into the blackness of true death, the one who killed his wife and son, Baron Mattis. But when he realized he enjoyed this act, he re-examined his motives. And from that moment forward, after he reclaimed vengeance on Baron Mattis, all he desires is to spare others the torture and heartache that he himself had suffered. And if he goes to the grave knowing that he had saved only one person from the torment that he was forced to endure, he will count himself a lucky man and judge his life to have been worth. And so throughout 2nd edition, you can see a lot of his journeys, killing ghosts, vampires, werebeasts, and all these other creatures that he writes about. He is above all else a very intelligent hunter, and he does not rely on pure strength, he relies on knowledge. That is how he's able to take down creatures such as liches or the most powerful werebeasts and vampires throughout Ravenloft. Near the end of his guides, we see the first compendium, Van Richten's Monster Hunter Compendium 1, be released. Though, Van Richten is not the one who has released it. Instead, it is 2 sisters, Jennifer and Lori Weathermay Foxgrove, who write, curiously, it has been 5 years since the renowned undead hunter, Dr. Rudolph Van Richten, vanished after leaving his home to go on one of his many investigations into huntings and monstrous activities. Where he went and why are unknown. These 2 sisters adored Dr. Van Richten from childhood and called him uncle. He taught them everything he knew, and they are continuing on his works, publishing these compendiums of all the volumes of guides he had during his life. So at the end of 2nd edition, there are many sources that we can see from across D&D that say that Van Richten is missing. Some say that he was in bad health and went off wandering a cure. and others say that he is dead. Some call him the Late. Even the Foxgrove sisters eventually write in one of their compendiums. Dr. Van Richten, who we fondly call Uncle, is almost certainly dead. They held out every hope and searched for him, but they have reconciled the past that he will never come back. But we have 3 more editions of D&D, and as Van Richten's story progresses, we do learn more about the late Doctor. In 3rd edition, we get a little bit more info about this disappearance of Rudolph Van Richten. Surely the most prolific monster hunter and one of D&D's greatest heroes of all time couldn't end on a missing note. But we do see more and more of this evidence. Apparently he had retired, and during this peaceful retirement is when he had vanished. There are numerous reports that confirm Van Richten dead. Though with no evidence, I find it very difficult to believe that Dr. Rudolph Van Richten simply disappeared into the night to die. And we learn much more detail in 3rd edition about the actual story of what happened the night he'd lost his family. When his son was taken, the Vistani that came to Darkon was of the Radanovich clan, and they demanded treatment for one of their kin, a young boy who was mortally ill, mere hours from death. No mortal could save him, but the grief turned to rage quickly, as Van Richten told them there was nothing to be done. Not just by him, but no mortal power could save the boy. The Radanoviches chose to punish the Doctor by stealing his own son, Erasmus, so there was cause after all. As he chased after them, although Van Richten initially said that the journey was uneventful, we find out that he might have had a secret, something that he wasn't proud of. As night fell and the mist surrounded him, and he found himself surrounded by the shambling undead that eternally roam Darkon's borders. To meet these nocturnal sentries was to die. Unbeknownst to Van Richten at this time, these undead were commanded by the ruler of Darkon, a secret lich, Azalin. But Azalin did not choose to kill Van Richten this night. Instead, he chose to aid the hapless Doctor, guiding him to the Radanovich camp and even granting him command over the walking dead that surrounded him. When Van Richten found the camp, they informed him it was too late for his boy, and that they had already sold him to Baron Metis. But what Van Richten did next would haunt him for the rest of his life. Maddened by despair, Van Richten ordered his undead entourage to attack the Vistani. As the rotting sentries fell upon the Radanoviches and slew them nearly to every last man and woman. Madame Radanovich was dragged down, though she cried out before she died, "Live you always among monsters, and see everyone you love die beneath their claws." Van Richten didn't know this at the time, but this was a Vistani curse. And with the bloody deed done, Van Richten traveled on alone to the home of Baron Metis. And we know the rest of that story. Though we do find out Erasmus gave Van Richten the initial knowledge he needed to kill Baron Metis. And so his revenge was swift, and from that point on he regretted a lot of what he had done in his despair. Van Richten next appears in 5th edition, and this is a spoiler alert for Curse of Strahd. We all know Curse of Strahd takes place in Barovia, which is in Ravenloft. So it's not surprising that we may see a glimpse of Rudolph Van Richten during his life, the height of his knowledge, the height of his monster hunting abilities, and what greater monster than Strahd. Strahd has been distracted by reports that Rudolph Van Richten, the legendary vampire hunter, has come to Barovia, and Strahd has spies searching for him. Rudolph Van Richten takes an alias, Rictavio. He, of course, is trying to kill Strahd von Zarovich, and will assist the party in doing so. He also has a protege, Esmeralda de Avenir of Istana. She was part of the clan that stole Erasmus from Van Richten. She says that even today, years after this event, she can still hear Erasmus's pleas for mercy that haunted her childhood. Esmeralda states that her family was the one who took Erasmus, and that Van Richten could have done them harm, but instead he interrogated Esmeralda's mother and father, and he spared their lives. But Van Richten's own words and notes you can find in Curse of Strahd he admits that he released the zombies, and the entire tribe was eaten alive, and so he was cursed. We see Van Richten finally reflect on the curse that he had not paid much mind to. He says that I expect that those who think me a hero will change their minds when they know the whole truth about his life as a hunter. He reveals that here and now he has been the indirect and yet cause of many deaths, the loss of many good friends. He comes to grips with the realization that he has been the object of a Vistani curse, and those around him are the ones that have fallen victim to it. Though he describes a lot of this to be his own fault. They had brought an extremely ill member of their tribe to Van Richten one evening and insisted that they treated him, but he had taken to drink in those days, and under the spell of the bottle, he was unable to save the young man's life. In fear of their retribution, he begged the Vistani to take anything, if only they would withhold their terrifying powers, about which at the time he knew nothing. To his astonishment, they took his son in exchange for their loss. By the time he sobered and realized what had occurred, they were gone. If this wasn't confusing enough, there's a third telling of what happened with the Vistani that night. And the final telling of this, in Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, is that Rudolph ran afoul the Radinoviches, a family simply using Vistani traditions as a cover for brigandage. And when the doctor refused to treat one of their mortally ill members, they kidnapped Erasmus, and he shattered their criminal operation and brought Irina, the leader, to justice, and she is the one who cursed him. There are many conflicting points in Van Richten's story. I think the most likely is that he did murder the Vistani that took his son, and after that moment, he vowed his life to be better. But in him does exist that same man that snapped the night that his son and wife were killed. And so, at the end of 5th edition, as Rudolph Van Richten's life has unfolded, we are left with a lingering question that hangs in the air. Is Van Richten truly gone, dead? Legends whisper of his death. Some believe he walks the shadows veiled in secrecy, forever vigilant against the horrors that plague the world. Could it be that Van Richten has transcended the boundaries of life and death? As we ponder the enigma of Van Richten's fate, we are left with one undeniable truth. The legacy of this legendary monster hunter lives on, inspiring generation after generation to take up arms against the encroaching darkness, and perhaps, one day, the truth behind his mysterious disappearance will be revealed, unveiling one final twist in the tale that is Dr. Rudolph Van Richten.